Hi, my name is Greg Remke. I work for Economic Thinking and I do workshops and provide online resources on the economics of high school and homeschool and world schools, speech and debate topics and motions. So for the WHO 2020, there is a motion. This House believes that individuals, on having met their basic needs in life, have a moral obligation to donate a majority portion of their disposable income. So not all their disposable income, but a majority. So 51% of disposable income after they've met their basic needs, which leads to the question of basic needs and also involves another number of other questions. I'm not a moral philosopher. My background is in economics and economic history. So I'm going to look at some of the economics of this and particularly at the challenge of the effectiveness on donations in raising the standard of living of people in need versus investment versus other technologies or ways to help people. So we can learn some from development economics and from economic history, which is my background. So looking at basic needs, what are basic needs? If you look online about this, you find some of the history of it coming from original writing of Abraham Maslow with his hierarchy of needs. This is sort of introductory psychology that you get in college or high school. So first are physiological needs, food, water, warmth, rest, safety needs, security, safety, and then psychological needs. Maslow has belongingness and love, self-esteem, and at the top, self-actualization, having a calling, having something that makes us feel great when we do it, whether as a lawyer, an artist, an engineer, or whatever. Abraham Maslow is fascinating. In psychology, it's interesting, whereas many psychologists studied people who were had problems, right? People who were sick or mentally ill or challenged in some way. Maslow's research was on very successful people, people who were successful in business and their home life and their community, and he tried to figure out what helped explain why they were so successful and fulfilled, sort of a sense of eudaimonism, Aristotle's human flourishing. And he argued it's because they had a being value, sort of a set of psychological vitamins, and they pursued their calling. They were in the work that somehow they personally needed or wanted that fulfilled them. And that's what his self-actualization is about. But anyway, down this topic is looking at the basic needs. We'd want everybody to have all the needs, however they're defined. But the topic looks at donating to provide basic needs for others. So you could look online on this. My little dictionary in Apple takes me to Wikipedia. And basically, it starts with the measurement of absolute poverty. And this is the World Bank and the UN originally trying to define what the basic needs were. And these are really for physical well-being, consumption goods. You can read more about this. Traditional list is food, including water, clean water, shelter, clothing. And there's more on this, talking about sanitation, education, healthcare. This quote comes from aid agencies, and so different aid agencies say we need to provide for the basic needs, and here's how we define basic needs. If you look more at the history, the International Labor Organization and the 76 World Employment Conference defined it as food, clothing, housing, education, and public transportation. So I guess no cars, part of basic needs. So anyway, this gives you some background on the history of this and the economics. Economics plays a part of this. This is a little about me. I've been doing some presentations for a World Schools topic before the Argo Open in past tournaments, and then for the Youth Education Forum in Skopje, Macedonia, where I've been trying to discuss basic economics and apply those to chosen motions or announced motions. So that's a little bit about me. Now for this topic, again, donating different from investing. Capital, we're looking at how do people escape poverty and move to prosperity? How can people who already can meet their basic needs, how can they help other people meet their basic needs? prosper. So this topic looks at charity. One thing to consider is, it might be better, traveling to a country and helping people directly, or investing in, let's say, one of the micro investment funds that make small loans to people. The Grameen Bank might be another approach. Also in development, you've got this debate between Jeffrey Sachs and William Easterly that was very large in the 90s, 2000s, particularly when Bill Clinton and then George Bush were president. And Jeffrey Sachs said, we can end poverty now. A major surge of smart charity investment or giving money. And he had the Millennium Villages Project. Let's find 10 villages. Let's donate a lot of money to them to boost agricultural productivity, their technology, help them prosper. And then we'll learn from that and expand to other villages. William Easterly with 20 years experience in the World Bank, has written a number of books, very skeptical of foreign aid, skeptical of the World Bank, skeptical of efforts, skeptical of Jeffrey Sachs in particular, saying we can't just donate poor people out of poverty. And in fact, a lot of these aid programs turn into control. We give money to the Ethiopian government, and they use that to relocate thousands of people to pursue some development project. So he's skeptical, and you can read more about their debate online, development economics issues there. So we have in this, again, the affirmative is saying we need to donate disposable income. Speaking of basic needs for things, is quiet a basic need? I have leaf blowers and lawnmowers and other noise-making devices outside, but hopefully they won't come through in the microphone. Okay, what are basic needs? You could say food, clothing, shelter, which means agriculture, textiles, housing, then energy and transportation. So looking at the basic needs that people have to survive require industry. So that's why in poor countries and in economic history, agriculture is first and foremost, right? The United States, Western Europe, through all history until the 1800s, 90% of the people were growing food because we barely had the ability to grow more food than the population consumed. Then came textiles. So the Industrial Revolution was, partly developing better technology to produce clothes so poor people could afford more clothes. And this comes to the developing world in recent decades. And then, of course, housing. So you need industry to produce these basic material things that are what the basic needs people have. And so if you look at development going to, let's say, China or India or Africa, it's boosting agricultural productivity. Then it's allowing textile mills, textile plants where people can make clothes less expensively for their people. And then it's boosting housing, energy, education, medical care are parts of that. But we have this question, as I mentioned here, what in terms of needs, we need food, but what kind of food? Local food or organic food, that's often more expensive. Local and domestic clothes, your neighbors make your clothes, or do you import them from China or Bangladesh where they're far cheaper, but then you're destroying the potential jobs of people in your community who could be making clothes. Housing, it's really cheap to make housing. Factory housing, you can produce huge amounts of housing inexpensively. In Seattle area where I am, in San Francisco, the Bay Area, there's developers who said we can build 1 million units of housing in a year. They have the technology to do it. They can't get permission from state and local governments to build housing because, a lot of people don't like to have more housing because it means the highways are more crowded. It means more people. So we have the technology to build lots of housing for people. But then the question is, what kind of housing? Here in Seattle, developers have said we'll build huge amounts of really inexpensive housing for the homeless, but it'll be small units, with microwave ovens rather than regular ovens, with 110 instead of 220, with no parking. But none of this is legal because of, again, restrictions on the type of housing that's believed allowable, or building second homes or units on your property, mother-in-law apartments. Those are not legal in much of the country. So you can build housing, you can provide clothes, you can have a huge amount of food, but the question is what kind of, at least in terms of basic needs. And again, I'm not a debate expert. I'm an economist, and so I apologize if these aren't directly at your interests on this topic, and you can always skip forward or go to another video. We're looking at human needs for human flourishing. I mean, for example, travel. Would you consider your basic needs met, just food, clothing, housing, or do you want to have the opportunity to travel and see the world? Is that a need or a want? How do we distinguish exercise, sports, chocolate, wine? Which things do we really need? And the affirmative is maybe saying we don't need any of these things, but the psychological damage of not having any of these things. We could live as a hermit up in the hills, or we could join a monastery. And are their basic needs met? Yes, that's, and that's considered, an option that many pursue, and they believe their life is better that way. So there's lots of critics of the modern sort of materialistic world saying we consume too much, but a lot of people actually have shifted to consume less and have more experiences rather than material goods. But do we need those experiences? That would be a concern for the affirmative. Another way to look at this, by the way, is to say that we can, like Jeffrey Sachs advocates, everybody can escape poverty. And we've had dramatic success in escaping poverty around the world in the last few decades, and I think that's relevant for this topic too. So, poverty to prosperity, what are some of the stories on this? In economics, Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, he's actually he's inquiring into the nature of wealth and how, basically looking around Scotland, how is it, he's writing in 1776, and noticing that Scotland is getting wealthier. Everyday people in Edinburgh and Glasgow and the area are eating better than their parents and grandparents. Their clothes are better than and this is, before the Industrial Revolution. Agricultural productivity is increased, housing is improving, and he's wondering, what leads to this? And he finds that it's trade, it's enterprise, it's reducing the restrictions on everyday activity. And he describes this in The Wealth of Nations, which is one of my devices interfered there. Okay, Switzerland, a similar story. We think of Switzerland as being wealthy, but Switzerland was one of the poorest countries in Europe. Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian and Swiss economist, argues in his documentary, The Power of the Poor, that Switzerland revised its legal institutions, and that transformation allowed the Swiss to prosper. Plus, it's got decentralized government and various advantages there. The Swiss moved from the poorest to the wealthiest, and we want to know why. Because if this is what we want for, poor people in Africa, Latin America, and India, we want to learn from the past of how people got their basic needs met and then moved up Maslow's pyramid. Other recent examples, the Asian tigers, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. In the 1960s, these were poor countries. They were in the developing world, the same level of income on average as India, Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria. Yet somehow these countries took off. Actually, in the 50s and 60s, the countries in Latin America were on average wealthier than these Asian countries. Yet by the 1980s, the Asian countries are wealthier. Somehow Latin America stagnated or didn't grow as much as its population, yet Southeast Asia, they took off. So the stunning economic growth in Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and continuing, now people in Hong Kong on average are wealthier than people in England. So how did that happen? And this, of course, the growth in these Asian countries is what led to the tremendous growth in China. The Chinese leaders looked around and saw how prosperous people in Japan and the Asian tigers were and emulated that. So the charter city that was the key to Hong Kong, and Singapore, a city-state, is what China, Deng Xiaoping emulated with setting up Shenzhen and other charter cities that were really models of Hong Kong, where people were free to invest, free trade, low taxes, and plus China deregulated agriculture and then opened up to free enterprise all over. So China's tremendous economic growth, and also Ireland. So Ireland is a poor country in the 1980s. It's a prosperous country by the 2000s. Chile was the poorest country in Latin America in the 1970s. It becomes the wealthiest country in Latin America by 2010. At the same time, other countries like Argentina and Venezuela grow poor. Estonia and Dubai have also prospered. So the decline, Argentina, Venezuela, the United Kingdom after World War II, when they nationalized most of their industries and experimented with socialism, that stagnated and depressed average income in the United Kingdom until they privatized again and deregulated their economy. And now that's an assertion on my part. You could watch the Commanding Heights documentary, which I'd recommend, that gives you more of the story. I'm arguing that we should learn from history, various examples around the world on what leads to economic development and prosperity. Thank you. I'll just quit that. So interesting in this is the story that the wealthiest places in the world are actually charter cities like Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, Shenzhen, Monaco and Liechtenstein, Andorra, other places in Europe that are vestiges of the ancient charters that were part of Europe's economic development. And I'm going to pass over this, but for development in Africa, here's a large-scale development taking place in Africa, basically setting up new charter cities. The Charter City Institute talks about this, charter cities in Latin America and Africa that are trying to build the infrastructure of copying the success of Hong Kong and bringing that to places that have struggled with development for so many decades. So investment in charter cities might be better than just donating to poor people, would be an argument that the negative could make, it seems to me, on this motion. A little more on this story. Here's an overall, remember our definition of basic needs was saying, and the World Bank has a definition of absolute poverty, which is $1.90 a day. And they're saying this is your basic needs, to not starve to death. And they're observing pretty stunning economic progress around the world. In 1990, there were, nearly 2 billion people in absolute poverty, below that, less than $1.90 a day. By 2013, it's down to 763 million, and by 2017, it's down further. So we have a sort of an amazing story. We have had a 2 billion increase in the number of people in the world, yet the number of people in absolute poverty have declined by over 1 billion people. And that's in the measure of, basic needs. Fewer people don't have their basic needs met. Now, that doesn't mean that people earning $1.90 a day are prosperous or happy or that it's good enough. We obviously want incomes to go up and to go up dramatically so that we don't have very poor people anywhere. But it's useful to see we've had a decrease in that poverty. And why did that happen? Economists argue it's because we've had a massive increase in economic freedom. Communism disappeared, China deregulated, then later India deregulated. As countries move to have more open trade, more open world investment, reducing or increasing economic freedom, the argument is that's the reason why we've had this economic progress. Now, others disagree, or they say, yeah, we've had progress, but we've had increased inequality, increased income inequality. So there's different measures of progress, but at least this is the story of the success we've had, and most of the success comes from China and India. So for example, in this chart, you're looking at 1970, and over 55% of the people in East Asia are living under this basic needs level, under $1.90 a day. And more measures of this, if you measure, again, starting in 1990, child mortality, hunger, illiteracy, pollution, poverty. And these are measures sort of the lack of basic needs. You see they're falling in each of these parts of the world, poverty most dramatically, and all the others fall as well. And you can see China's the big, from nearly 750 million people under, without basic needs met, down to 25 million. In India, the fall is not so dramatic, but still significant. Okay, I do workshops on the economics of debate topics. For the European Union immigration reform topic, which is the NCFCA topic, I discuss these economic development issues because obviously it's the lack of basic needs being met in Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa is what's driving the large-scale migration into Europe, legal and illegal, the refugees and immigrants. Similarly, in the United States, the problems in Latin America, Honduras, Guatemala, elsewhere. That's why people are coming legally and illegally into the United States. That's why immigration is a controversial issue, and illegal immigration is stimulating populism and all these nationalist responses, which is a tremendous danger and problem in the US and Europe, as well as other countries. So the things that I'm covering for this basic needs topic are really drawn from my introduction to economics for my debate workshops, or more videos and materials online. Okay, and again, the negative on this, you're saying people should donate for others' basic needs, or should donate after your basic needs, but actually labor mobility is a far better way to help the poor. A poor person in Africa or India being able to travel to Europe or America, work, does far more to reduce poverty. Trillions of dollars of benefits just in increasing labor mobility would overwhelm any of the help you could provide through donations to the poor. At least that's what economists would argue. So for farmers, moving to better land helps you. Moving to better political climates, right? So the getting out of the dysfunctional places in North Africa to Italy, to Greece, to even to Turkey, that allows people better opportunities. So again, I'm contrasting migration to foreign aid or donations. And I realize in this topic, the focus could be made by the affirmative just to donate to people in your community. Meet your basic needs and help the poor in your community. It doesn't need to be a global topic of, helping the poor all around the world. But I think it's relevant to talk about how we help people in need. People in under situations of poor climate or poor government, exiting, trying to change the government is one way, by voting or voicing your opposition, by protesting, but also just exiting, going to another place where you can better pursue food, clothing, shelter, satisfying your basic needs for yourself and your family, maybe is a better way to do things. So Albert Hirschman's key on that. Ilya Soman writes on foot voting with his recent book. Other books on immigration reform focus on the importance of mobility. It's a political issue if immigrants come and vote. It's not a political issue if immigrants come with a work visa to work and go home, which many want to do in any case. Yeah, so this is the Freedom Move book that you can find out more online. And again, I offer this as a contrast to donating. And as you know, if you study the role of migration, it's the biggest support of aid in Africa and Latin America is Africans and Latin Americans sending money back. Those that have moved to the U.S. send money back to their family. Those that have moved from India and work in the Middle East or work in Europe, sending money back. These remittances are the biggest source of aid. And to some extent, that's what people do in the family. They meet their basic needs when they're working in Europe and they send money back to their families. More on economic freedom. This is the Heritage Foundation, a conservative organization. Heritage and the Wall Street Journal develop an index of economic freedom where they argue improving measures of economic freedom is how you meet basic needs in the world. Any country that steps toward more economic freedom, which means sound money, trade, reasonable tax policies, judicial independence. That's how the citizens in that country meet their basic needs and move up the Maslow's pyramid. This is a similar measure, Economic Freedom of the World by the Fraser Institute. The methodology is somewhat different, but a similar effort to measure those policies that allow people to meet basic needs around the world. I recommend this video by Hernando de Soto. It's free streaming online. Watch the whole thing or watch the first few minutes. And he basically makes the argument that sure, the developed world's wealthy, but most people in the world are living in absolute poverty or in dysfunctional poverty, and there needs to be a way for these people to improve their lives. He argues it's not a matter of aid, it's a matter of dysfunctional legal systems. In Latin America and Africa, the poor live under informal legal systems. That is, their law is not recognized by their government. In Egypt or North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, everyday people live in an informal world. It's like in India and Africa, most poor people go to private schools, private for-profit schools. These schools are often illegal, that is, the government doesn't recognize them, but the poor people want an education. The government-provided schools are so poor, are so ineffective that they're willing to sacrifice the limited money they have to get a better education. James Tooley talks about this in his book, The Beautiful Tree, and you could find more information about him and his programs online. Maybe I'll put a link up here. But if you consider education a basic need, who's going to provide it? Do donations provide it, or do more opportunities for entrepreneurial schools provide it? In this documentary, De Soto focuses mostly on migration, people migrating to cities around the world. That's sort of the driving force of change that he emphasizes, and this is part of the immigration challenge as well. Also, for the migration surge into Europe in 2015, it follows the Arab Spring and the civil war in Syria. And De Soto, in this video, says it's a lack of economic freedom in Middle East, North Africa. Everyday business people can't get permits, can't get titles to their companies and housing. And so that's why business people lit themselves on fire in protest, and hundreds of thousands are in the street trying to get the freedom, to live a life, which they don't have in many countries. And that's, he describes that more in his videos. Locked Out is the isit.org version of this as well for schools. So more on my videos, or videos that are online for this topic. I recommend them. And in the basic needs video, one of the things I'd also suggest is a focus on energy. Hans Rosling, Hans Rosling, in his video that you can find on TED, it's a TED Talk, it's called The Magic Washing Machine, and I'd recommend watching at least the first 10 minutes. He argues that electricity is a basic need. Many in the developing world now have access to, let's say, solar power or some energy to charge their cell phones or to maybe keep a little refrigerator cold, but around the world, most people are washing clothes by hand, and that's mostly women, and that's because they don't have enough electricity to run a washing machine. And he talks about the different levels of prosperity, and he basically argues that enough energy to power a washing machine is a basic need of people around the world, and until people have access to this energy, they don't have their needs met. And that's and it's a compelling video. And he, fossil fuels are the cheapest source of energy, but he advocates in here more development of green energy, renewable energy as well. So anyway, highly recommended. I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your debates. If you have questions, you can email me. Thank you.